Welcome back. We are ready to hear public comment, and the first testifier is Professor Kostas Panagopoulos from Fordham University.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you to the board for this opportunity to present some findings from a study that we conducted in the context of the 2013 elections. I want to thank the Campaign Finance Board not only for this opportunity, but also for working with my collaborators, Don Green at Columbia University and John Krasno at Binghamton University on this research. The board was instrumental in working with us to help provide data and other assistance, as well as feedback and support for the project, and we really appreciate that. Couldn't have done it without you. We also couldn't have done this project without generous support and funding from the... Yes. Let me know if is that better?
Well,
great.
Awesome.
We also couldn't have conducted our research without the generous support of the Democracy Fund and the Open Society Foundation, so we really appreciate their support. What we were interested in looking at in this study is in whether or not we could stimulate small donors to contribute to political campaigns by encouraging them to do so using different nonpartisan messaging. And so the way that we studied this in the New York City elections in 2013 was to conduct a randomized field experiment in which we mailed randomly selected New York City voters with one of 8 versions of a postcard mailing that had 4 different messages on it. One of the messages was designed to encourage people to contribute on the basis of making their voice heard in the political process. A second message was designed to encourage them to vote on the basis of helping to counteract special interests and the influence that they have in their efforts in elections. A third message encouraged them to contribute by appealing to their interest in promoting their policy preferences, and a fourth message simply appealed to them to contribute on the basis of contributing as a civic duty. So these were 4 messages, and another element that we randomly varied in the study was to include some information, a sentence or so, about the New York City Campaign Finance Program. So just to give you an idea of what this mailing, what these messages would have sounded like, the first one, the voice appeal said, only 2% of Americans donate money to any political candidate. If politicians only listen to the people who give them money, there's a lot they aren't hearing. Make your voice heard. Donate to your favorite candidate in this year's elections in New York City. Even a small contribution will send a message to the candidates. Make sure the candidates are hearing from all Americans. Donate today. That message in some versions of in the alternative version that could have included information about the Campaign Finance Board, also that version also included, remember that New York City's Campaign Finance Program adds as much as $6 to every $1 given by city residents. That really increases the value of your contribution. So voters received, and that element was varied in each of the 4 messages. So there was, in essence, one of 8 messages they could have received via postcard mailing. We also created a website that and listed it on the postcard. So if someone received this postcard, they could go to the website, put in their address, and see who the candidates were in their districts or in any district, and they would have been directly to their website or to their campaign office, where they could have, we tried to facilitate these contributions by creating this website. So once again, I just would emphasize that this was a strictly nonpartisan messaging. We didn't encourage them to contribute to any particular candidates, but simply to contribute in the process. These experimental evaluations really took place in one of 2 contexts. One comprised voters in 7 targeted council districts that were especially competitive in 2013. In these districts, 12,000 individuals were randomly assigned to receive these encouragements, and there were 119,000 voters or so that received no mail that we compared them to. We also had an at-large district from the at-large sample from the remaining council districts. These voters were divided into 20 strata based based on their likelihood of contributing to campaigns in general. 8,000 individuals in the at-large sample were mailed these encouragements to contribute, and we had 857,000 in the control group that received no mailing. We measured our outcome using the New York City campaign's donor records provided by the Campaign Finance Board and summed all donations recorded after the date of our mailings were sent to voters, which was in the last 3 weeks of the election cycle. Our results, which at this point are still preliminary, but they do suggest that only one of the mailings consistently encouraged and stimulated contributing behavior. That was the message that encouraged donations on the basis of policy preferences. That message read as follows. Democracy, let's see, not that one. Every day our elected officials make important decisions about all kinds of policies, from taxes to education to safety and crime. Their decisions can affect us all. Candidates in New York City need your help to fight for the issues you believe in. Campaigns are expensive and every contribution helps. Do your part, donate to your favorite candidate who is fighting for the causes you care about in this year's elections. That was the only message that consistently and significantly increased contributions, although I should point out that the mailing had no detectable effect on the percentage of New Yorkers who contributed, but it did make recipients who did contribute significantly more generous in the donations they made. Those who received the policy mailing more than doubled the average amount they contributed. None of the other mailings, as I said, had any detectable effect on the rate or size of contributions, despite the fact that 4 of the mailings called attention to the matching fund system in New York City. So those are our preliminary results and suggest something about the motivations that might underlie contributing behavior. Further research is necessary to test these implications and these policy messaging more directly in other contexts. I should add that we conducted parallel experiments in New Jersey and Virginia that included the same messaging, and these are our findings are somewhat telling in that if we're interested in stimulating especially small donor contributions, that the motivations that we try to tap into and the kind of messaging that we use will be very important, because many appeals don't seem to work. And so we need to really isolate those appeals that do work and reach out to voters on the basis of those appeals, at least when it comes to nonpartisan messaging. So I just wanted to provide this initial evidence and findings from our study, and I expect that we'll have more detailed results to follow in the future, and we'll keep the board updated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath.
Thank you.
Okay, did anyone have any questions? No, okay.
Fantastic. You have a written study?
We have some evidence that we can share with you as part of our written testimony, and we'll have a complete report available within the next few weeks.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Our next testimony is from David Coyote, who is a candidate for City Council in the 2013 elections.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify and to say a little bit about my experience and my idea in the last election. Well, my experience, as I will tell you today, is not an easy one, because I have so many issues that, as a candidate, that I don't expect to experience, because it doesn't matter what you are doing. Once you are honorable, when you're ready to serve your community, and but the way that it comes to me when it comes to raising fund is somehow unbearable, because in the first instance, it takes so long before I can get my hand on my on the matching fund, in the sense that every time. Well, what I can say is that probably because of the Sandy, because most of the, when you submit a document that requested by the campaign finance board, even sometimes you submitted it in person, and they might say they don't get it, and you have to resubmit it again, and this continue going until when and by the time those people that the equipment they receive their fund, I know they might be a little bit experienced. However, as myself, I'm not new because I ran in the special election in 2011. So I know what I'm doing at this time. Yet, I have so much problem that I couldn't get money to do what I have to do until probably 2 weeks before the election. And the other thing that I have to stress here is that I want to narrate another issue, that when you have a public fund and you use that public fund again, I'm talking about the equipment now, the people in the office that you want to run against, and they use the same money to knock you out of the ballot. This happened in 2011, which I sent a letter to the campaign finance board. I never hear anything about this issue. When my opponent knocked me out of the ballot with the public money, and I tried hard to make my own way to get my own fund, but it wasn't happening. Then this time around, that all the effort is made to knock me out of the ballot failed because I was fully prepared. Now, I can't get the money on time to do what I have to do. So, if there is any way that it will be easy in the part of those people that are just coming to serve their constituents, I would be glad if this thing can be implemented accordingly and put in place. And if there be anything that will impact, that make impact on the newcomer, that will make it easy for them, I would be glad if this body can do it on time. And I really appreciate what campaign finance board did, because they keep mostly the liaison person in the board. She was very eloquent and very helpful. But a tree cannot make forest, because each time we call Miss Anna, she always ready to help us. But she is the only one that we can reach out to on time. And this really caused a lot of aggravation, that we do not have money to do what we do on time. So it will be appreciated if there is any way that the body that's taking care of all these things and make it more easy, or to make more, to get more people that will help us to be able to do what we have to do on time. Because when you call, by that time if you call, you can't even get through. Every time that you call, there's no phone. I have to come here before when I get here, they have to understand that we have to go to another place, and nobody inform anybody what is going on. That, okay, the office is moved because of so and so. You have to go to so and so place. We are so, it was miserable. So in this sense, I did not have a good experience in dealing with the situation as it happened. And the other thing that I asked this question before, because I know that there's a lot of people that been neglected. That is why I mentioned the homeless people. We have, at this time, based on my own research, I know we have at least today we have about 50,000 homeless people in different shelters in New York City. In my own district community board, probably we have about 19 shelters there. And these people, they change time to time. During the election, when you go there before you talk to them, I understood that they send voting registration to them. That might be true. But what good does voting registration does when you give them voting registration, they fill it out. If the next week, they move them to another shelter. And the following weeks, they move them to another shelter. And the election comes now. These people, they cannot vote. So this is of two things that I will suggest. Probably, wherever, mostly when you can be designated as an homeless person, that wherever you are during that election will be your residence. Wherever you are, when you go to the voting, any voting post that you go to, they should let you vote there to the candidate of your choice. Once you can prove that you are homeless and this is my residence at this time, they should let you vote, because it won't be fair to those people that they are citizens, they have right to vote, and they get to the voting post, they say they cannot vote because they are homeless. So this has to be addressed. That is one of the experience that I witnessed myself. And to make it make it short, we have to look out more to those people that just come in as rocky in politics. Because it's like when those people that here already, they are using their power to suppress those people that just come in. Despite the fact that the community want them, but they have money power and they get their fund on time. And so they can use this to suppress those people that are coming up. And if this committee can do something to make it easy for those people that come in, it will be highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coyote.
I think I want to address one thing that Mr. Coyote said. I think I just wanted to say that I think being a new candidate is a very challenging task, and thank you for your attempts to serve the people. I think in a democracy you always need candidates as well as voters. But I will say that I've been on this board now since 2009. And I've gotten to know the people on the staff. I've seen them in action. The complexities that you have as a candidate are mirrored by hundreds of other candidates. And then for the staff who are actually trying to work with these hundreds of candidates, it's also similarly complex. And the complexity was made much more difficult actually by Sandy. Which threw, I think, their operations into a little bit, create some really unique challenges for us. And that things may not have been perfect, but I will say that from my experience that my dealings with the staff, especially in candidate services, has been that they've done their utmost, they've done a phenomenal job. I'm really proud to be on this board because I'm proud of the staff. And I think there always room for improvement, but I just wanted to make that comment in favor of the people who work for the people of New York in this important function.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I know what there's a lot to harvest, but the servants are few. Now I'm just appealing to the people in charge to provide more servants to the vineyard, so things will be easy for everybody. The aggravation will be eliminated or reduced.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Our next testifier is, we're going to go to the next testifier. Thank you, Mr. Coyote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next testimony is from Jean Similian. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Mr. Similian. From candidate for City Council in Council District 45 in the 2013 elections.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for everything you did. Watching fun, it was really good experience. Like we said previously, that
I'm sorry, Mr. Can I interrupt you? Can we just switch those two microphones just to see if maybe that is the problem?
Yes,
Turn that one off, Matt.
Yep.
Okay.
It's
Thank
better.
you.
It's
That's
better now.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, thank you. Like I said previously, that thank you for New York City Campaign Finance Board, because I did receive matching fund. That was great experience for me, and also I appreciate Miss Hannah, assistant. She was very helpful. The only thing I could say that it's just a statement. In order to make the race more competitive, so I'm suggesting that the CFB will allow the candidate, after being on the ballot, to obtain at least a percentage of his matching fund, because the incumbent has an advantage. We receive the money late, so just like Mr. David said, we didn't have enough time to compete. But at least if we have a percentage or the percentile of the fund, so we're able to get more competitive race. So it just, to me, just a statement I would like to encourage the board to do.
Thank you.
And I say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Making the funds available earlier is what is.
Okay, thank you.
Is that, yeah. Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And because two people have mentioned her and she's sitting in the back, I'm going to ask Hannah Egerton, who's even was like commented favorably, and all our candidate services staff really do a great job. So, thank you. Okay. Our next testimony is from Greg Mays, who's candidate for City Council District 21 in 2013. Welcome, Mr. Mays.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Greg Mays, an unsuccessful candidate for the District 27 council seat in Jamaica, Queens. Again, thank you for the opportunity to just sort of share some thoughts with you today. And I really would just like to share three thoughts. One, as a novice candidate, there is no way in the world that I could run for the seat that I ran for without the support of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. That support really came in three ways. One, the training that I received, both compliance and C-SMART, was critically instructive to just sort of me learning how to be a candidate, quite frankly. The second way you guys were helpful was the candidate liaisons were invaluable to helping my campaign stay out of trouble. And I realize we haven't finished the audit process yet, so I'm going to knock on this formica right here. But both, Jack Beeson and Jordan Mavinsky were always available and always helpful. I was able to just sort of even, again, they just sort of kept me on the straight and narrow in terms of, I'd say, well, can I do this kind of fundraiser? And they'd say, well, I'm not really sure, that's a compliance issue, et cetera, et cetera. So they were both particularly helpful and always available. And finally, you guys were helpful in terms of those matching funds. I was just sort of pleased earlier to hear the gentleman talk about how the introduction of the matching funds have really meant that the city council now reflects demographically, ethnically, et cetera, what the city looks like. And I was thoroughly convinced, just being a part of that process, that was indeed the case. So it was just refreshing to hear someone just, confirm what I thought was the case. And as I went around and just sort of raised funds, I oftentimes shared that with people, that, the reason why I can run and why the council looks the way it does is because of these matching funds. And the phenomenal just sort of 6-to-1 nature of it, that 10-to-1 would just even be more extraordinary. But the 6-to-1 was really fantastically generous. So that's really the first just sort of point that I'd like to make, that I could not have been a candidate without the New York City Campaign Finance Board. So I thank you for that. The second thing I'd like to share is that really, the late timing of the release of my matching funds clearly had the biggest negative impact on the success of my campaign. But I will say that, you know, the late timing of those funds, of the release of funds, was my own fault. You know, there were, but, you know, the Campaign Finance Board being as helpful as it was, you know, I don't see why you all just can't go a little tiny bit further to really just sort of help candidates like me, a novice candidate, just sort of make the mistake that I made. And it would also just sort of mitigate against the impact of that sort of mistake. So one way I think that a change that might be helpful is the appeal process. If there is some way so that if you're coming up against a particular, whatever you call it, determination date, if you submit your documents, if the appeal process could actually take place and be resolved, if you will, prior to the release of those funds, it would be tremendously helpful in not giving someone who was more successful in just sort of getting those matching funds the edge, if you will. So I'm not sure if I'm just sort of totally making myself clear, but if the deadline is, you know, February the 5th to submit your documentation, and there was a window within which your liaison or whomever, the board could come back and say, well, you're missing A, and the opportunity to just sort of address A before the funds are released would be fantastically helpful. As it is now, you know, okay, you missed the first deadline, let's try to make it for the second deadline, et cetera, et cetera. Particularly as you get close to the election, that is when it just really, really just gets scary / you know, whatever we want to call it. But as you get close, those deadlines are just, they're critical. You know, when you miss one of them, you almost like, wow, this could be the end of my campaign in terms of the advantage of the timing. So there's an opportunity, I think, to just sort of make a couple of changes there in terms of the timing of it, to really to make those matching funds even more impactful for all the candidates and stuff. And then finally, the third point that I like to make is about sort of a candidate school, if you will. And I will say this, that, you know, most first-time candidates lose because they really don't have a sense of the sweep / rhythm of the entire campaign. And if you had that, then it would make a huge difference in how you just sort of, you know, conduct your campaign, you and or your campaign manager. It's so it's interesting because I don't necessarily, you know, I'm not trying to shift, you know, the entire burden of my just sort of ignorance, if you will, onto the Campaign Finance Board. But, you know, you all are doing such a fantastic job in helping people run. Just a small step or two would go even further in having a tremendous impact on the competitive landscape of electoral politics, because candidates would have to rely even less on clubs and unions and that kind of thing. And not to suggest that those are bad things, but they are certainly things that, you know, organizations, that's entities that can give an advantage to a particular candidate, particularly when they're up against novices, as I guess we'll always have when their term limits just sort of put in place. So, you know, other than that, you know, it was really, again, I don't know where I would have been without the Campaign Finance Board. I only wish that the New York City Board of Elections, and maybe this last thing, this campaign school, is something that, you know, you guys can do in conjunction with the New York City Board of Elections, because quite frankly, I'm not really sure. I still don't know, you know, what they do and the role that they play in helping, you know, folks run for office here in the city. So with that, I'm certainly willing to just sort of answer any questions that you might have, or else just sit down.
Well, I have a question. So, are you familiar with Khan Academy?
Yes, I am indeed.
Right. So, in terms of your campaign school,
Mhm.
is this something that, for instance, we could have Dan Cho provided us, so we have Cho Academy,
Hmm.
and it could be on YouTube,
Yes.
and you could then refer.
You could watch
to
the
it.
episodes. Absolutely.
Exactly. Then your treasurer and others could do that.
Yep.
Well,
We'll
Dan,
make a TV star out of Dan Yet.
Watch
he's,
out
He's
now.
a very photogenic guy.
Yes.
He gets lots of compliments from candidates. I'm sure he'd be delighted
Yeah.
to have Cho Academy.
Yeah, that would be fantastically helpful to be able to watch those videos. And I use as an example, we used, the campaign used Nation Builder. And Nation Builder has videos on their site that address just sort of different topics, if you will. But I think that would be a fantastic use of the internet in particular.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right. Thank you.
Our next testifier is Ben Max.
Hello. First, thank you for having me, and also I commend the Campaign Finance Board and all the work that's been done over the last several years to reform things and the way things are done in city elections. I've been in touch with Eric and with Matt and with Bonnie a bit over the past year or so. I started a website, DecideNYC.com, about a year or so ago. To fill a little bit of what I saw as a void in something that one of the first, Michael Malbin this morning mentioned about having more in-depth candidate information up on the web. And so when I look back at some previous election cycles, and I was starting to notice how many candidates were declaring for all these different city council seats and others, I thought that there was a little bit of room for more detailed profiling of what candidates were doing. And so I understand that the Campaign Finance Board is perhaps a little bit hamstrung by being a government agency and not being able to really add subjectivity to creating candidate profiles. And with NYC Votes, it's very much in the candidate's own words. And so, there could be a little bit of an issue there, but I think that there is perhaps room for what Mr. Malbin suggested this morning, which is expanding what the Campaign Finance Board does with candidates for office and their profiles, I'd be happy to further discuss that at another time. And I also think he mentioned the Columbia University project under Esther Fuchs, the Who's on the Ballot.org, which I'm sure many people are familiar with, and the tool that's involved available there. Perhaps there's room again for merging a lot of these things and creating even a more robust service. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm a former teacher, and I want to echo what the representatives from the League of Women Voters said earlier about civic education. I think that's really the biggest need here is, if we want the Campaign Finance Board and many candidates and community groups do amazing work to try to engage people, but we still see these really low turnout numbers. And so to me, so much of that goes back to what we're doing early on in people's lives to engage them with their communities, engage them with politics, engage them with government. And so again, perhaps I know that NYC Votes has done some programming in schools, and I know that it's on a smaller scale, but it's good whatever scale that is. But perhaps there's room for really scaling that up. And now with a new chancellor at the DOE and a new administration, perhaps there's room for more partnership there and really seeing what can be done to grow civic education in our schools. I think that in that regard, yes, there can be lobbying done, and I know that there's assembly members, I believe, who've put bills forward to push what's legally required for civics in our schools, and I don't think any of that has come up for a vote yet, but I think it's on the radar. I believe Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal has a bill to that effect. But so I think there could potentially be a role for the Campaign Finance Board to lobby or work in that regard to push civic education in schools. There are things going on smaller scales, like an organization called Generation Citizen that does action civics in schools, and they contract with the DOE to go in. But again, they're doing things on a small scale, and these are things that we would want to, in my opinion, ramp up and perhaps even try to convince the New York City Department of Education to make programmatic across schools. And the last point on that is, I have other suggestions as well and other ideas, but in the interest of time, the idea of engage, wanting to create an engaged citizenry, and O'Brien was correct before, I think, in my opinion, in saying that, we don't just want an increase in voter turnout, although that would be nice. We want informed voters turning out. And so we want to provide opportunities for our young people to do these things early on, I think. And that's where the Action Civics comes in. And that's where, again, and I can attempt to do this on my own, but I also think there's room for pushing perhaps the DOE to create more programmatic student government, student councils in schools across the city, and have those feed up in almost a model of how our government works as a representative federalist system, to do that with student government. So I think there's a lot of room for growth there, and if we engage more people at younger ages, I think we'd see the benefits of that later on in life. And that's it.
Questions?
Well, would you suggest that civics be added to the Common Core?
So the Common Core has literacy in social studies. The Common Core is broken down into mostly math and literacy standards, but there's literacy in social studies, and there's it's quite a list that it seems like you're at least somewhat familiar with, and so there's some things in there related to citizenship, but when New York State decides on its actual state-mandated courses and its state-mandated curriculum, the representative from the League of Women Voters was correct earlier that it's these small pieces, and most of it's just about learning the branches of government and things like that we all know about that happen in schools, but it's not actually about doing, it's not actually about connecting with your community. And again, I didn't come to promote Generation Citizen, but one thing that Generation Citizen does is they come into schools, and the program they do is they have students identify a problem in their school or in their community that they want to address. And that's not in the state curriculum. So, relative to the Common Core, I think there's a lot then that comes below that before you go from the Common Core to what actually happens in our classrooms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Next, we have O'Brien Murray.
Good afternoon. Thank you for, here's afternoon now. Thank you for doing this today on a beautiful New York day, huh? As you look outside, right, Commissioner?
Raining now.
I also want to welcome the new chair today. I think it's interesting that, and appropriate, that here we are sitting reviewing what's taken place in the past election while you weren't on the board, but yet we're a New York City resident and very much aware. So it's interesting to, I'm sure from your perspective, to hear all these pieces now that you may have not been either 100% aware of or as informed as you might be today from the candidates and other people here. So welcome. And I wish you luck with what you've got to carry on here.
Thank you.
So thank you. And I also want to commend the staff. I know a lot of times, whether it be on Twitter or when you see people, there are issues that come up and the staff has questions on things. But I think the team itself may be terrific. And it's just a question of how the team, the commissioners and the team, can work together going forward to do the right things that need to be done in the city to be a benefit to the elections. And not, dare I say at times, and I've said this publicly before, where I've accused the board of almost being a third party at times. If there's many more than two parties in this city and the state at times. But when you look at the Democrats and Republicans, there are decisions I feel this board may have made that have made them actually another party, which gives them tremendous impact on the elections. Instead of just opening the doors, they've actually been closing doors and had an impact. And I'll go through some of those points now. If you look at, again, just the mayor's race for right now, back in 2009, this commission made a decision to permit candidates that had raised money for the mayor's race prior to the term limits issue coming up to keep those funds. That in itself created an unlevel playing field for future mayoral candidates. Ironically, the candidate that is now the current mayor was somebody that it was detrimental to at that point because he'd used his funds for public advocate. But when you look at that, that left Christine Quinn with the opportunity to not have to raise as much money as a city and city council's member. What this board should have done is required at minimum, or possibly for those funds to be returned to their donors and not let them keep them for 4 years in an account to run for the mayor's seat, or at minimum, then, not permitted the matching funds to be part of that effort. And I think I point that out because 4 years ago when people donated to her to run, things were different possibly. They may have not wanted to donate for matching funds, who knows what. But once the money is in the candidate's account, it gave them a leg up for a lot of other people. And if you look at some other decisions throughout here, it was mentioned today by the League of Women Voters, the Liu decision, I think, had a major impact on the outcome of this election. If you look at a candidate that won the Democratic primary with barely 40%, had Liu had half of the matching funds that he wanted, had Liu had 3/4, whatever those numbers would have been, this election could have been very different possibly because there would have been a runoff. You would have had a greater, you're worried about percentage of turnouts and impact on the voters' impact on an election. Had there been another party involved, in this case, Liu's campaign, with more money, turnout would have been greater in the Democratic primary. You would have had a runoff between de Blasio and what appears to have been Thompson at that point. But what this board also did was they then decided, prior to the Board of Elections issuing any statement about where the election was on an official basis, where the count was going on, this board decided we will not let Thompson at that time spend any monies he raised, if I'm not mistaken, and the matching funds that he had gathered for or was entitled to for the runoff. In effect, what that did, because the runoff window was so small, was this board took away any opportunity for a runoff. They themselves, the members of this board, with their staff's advice and insight, made those decisions. I have talked to people at the Board of Elections and asked, was there any back-channel conversation took place between these two boards where you may have had more information the public was aware of, possibly two city agencies talking of some sort? I was ensured that no, none of that was done. So this board was operating on the same information that I had, and you had a candidate that barely broke the 40% threshold, and then the rug was pulled out from under his opponent for a runoff. So there's major issues there, I think, with what was best for the city and this board deciding. Additionally, when you look at the Spitzer-Stringer race, because of the deadlines required, and I understand candidates want the money earlier, so there's got to be a balancing act here on some of this, Scott Stringer determined he was part of this process, was never not going to be part of it in his case because he was not a potential self-funder. But he said, yes, I want to participate in the matching funds. Once he signed that piece of paper, he couldn't get out of it, but yet after the deadline occurred here, Elliot Spitzer decided he wanted to run for comptroller. He went out and petitioned and got on the ballot. There was no out from my conversation with Scott Stringer and other people for Scott Stringer to say, if Scott Stringer was in fact potential to be a self-funder, he never could have gone head-to-head with Elliot Spitzer if he so chosen, because your deadline superseded the Board of Election deadline for submission of petitions. Again, another situation where this board had an impact on an election potentially that I think it really has to evaluate. And you may want to consider saying, if you sign, if you register and say you're going to participate in matching funds, if somebody changes what they're going to do. If you look at John Catsimatidis in this race, if John was not an early candidate and came up at the last minute, some candidates may decide they didn't want to participate in the matching fund program based upon how the playing field was set. And I think when there's no out for this, that's a problem. Let them return their matching funds, let them not take matching funds, but there's got to be something that levels the playing field without letting you guys be the determination of what's going on here. I was also the only one that I believe stood up publicly and challenged the anybody but Quinn situation. Now, I've worked for Republicans and Democrats in this city before and across this country, but I was the one that on November 1st, after public reports were out there, filed the challenge with the advance group, class, and Mayor de Blasio's campaign at that point, and some other city council races on what had taken place here in an independent expenditure. And I think when this board hadn't stepped up and taken action, that again was something that this board should have done early on to determine what was going on here. Even since that was filed November 1st, I filed with the federal government a Hatch Act violation based upon public reports against Ambassador Patrick Gaspard, whose brother works for the advance group. This committee this commission and their investigators should give these points as much investigation as it did John, Liu, and others. You have public records out there on the involvement of a U.S. ambassador in this race, after the fact when he was a U.S. ambassador, his brother working for one of these entities. Additionally, once these reports were filed, I received phone calls from other people saying, oh, you missed this and you missed that. If that's what I'm getting, and I'm not an investigator, I can only imagine what your investigators should be coming up with. The same thing happened when I filed against the ambassador. Other things came up, and people called me and said, you should consider this and consider that. I'm considering filing additional comments at some point here. I'm talking to the attorneys about that. But there are a lot of issues here that this board didn't address. And my other concern on this is there are people, there's a gentleman in the audience who's working with you right now, and I hear there's issues that go back to campaigns as far as 2009. With term limits in this city right now, you have a mayor that's here for 4 years, maybe 8 if he gets reelected. I think the public has a right to have this investigation done in a very swift basis and not drag on for multiple years and worry about whether or not this mayor was elected with outside influences outside the spending caps when you had issues of public funds being used on this campaign. Had he been a self-funder, it may have not been as big an issue possibly, but here you've got taxpayer money just going into a campaign. Additionally, with Scott Stringer, then once he wins the Democratic primary, John Burnett, a very capable candidate for controller, because he got in the race so late, was not able to qualify for matching funds. He didn't get in the race until May. He did the petitioning. He focused on that, couldn't raise the money to qualify based upon the parameters you set for a debate. He was not able to debate Scott Stringer in the general election because of not meeting those thresholds. He was yet a major party candidate supported by the Republicans and the conservatives. There was unity. There was no primary, a qualified person. Yet, even though Scott Stringer received matching funds and taxpayer money for an election, he never faced a general election debate for what you guys had to do. And along the debates, again, with Scott Stringer and Elliot Spitzer, I know you guys set a calendar early, what you got to do for your partners for the debates, but CBS and Time Warner, we all saw this problem. I tweeted with your commission and your spokesman repeatedly during that period of time. There is no reason that CBS should have had that debate once that was happening. And I know you said, okay, the agreement was CBS would air only the debate. Well, as we all know from anything that's being promoted, once the station went dark and they played the Cartoon Network, no voters, the kids were watching it, but no voters were watching that Channel 2 News at night to hear watch the debate next week, watch the debate in 2 days. So therefore, there were people I know involved in campaigns that were unaware the debate was going to be on CBS and therefore didn't get a chance to watch it. Yes, it was on your website, but how many people go to a website to watch these types of things? It was supposed to be on CBS radio. Yankee game was rain delayed that day, so therefore it wasn't even on the radio that night. And you therefore had an opportunity for voters, a responsibility for voters to hear a debate. This commission did nothing. A week out, you should have come out and said very simply, CBS, if you're not on air right now, or Time Warner, we're going to let you air it too, but we're going to let another network step up and do it. But this commission, for whatever reason, decided not to change that or not to open the channels for other people to be able to watch this. I would also just point out in other issues, possibly when you look at campaign spending right now and you want to open the web and other formats to everybody else, there is a disincentive in any campaign to go out and prospect donors online. And the reason is, if I get $1 from somebody online and I get 6-to-1 matching, that's great. But with the campaign spending thresholds, wherever they are based upon city council races and other races, once you spend that $1 or $2 to try to get somebody, which is expensive to do for prospecting, that counts towards your cap. So therefore, what that means is you're staying in a very old school way of trying to reach out to people. And if you're talking about mobile phones for just making people want to come out and vote, you have to figure out how to open that opportunity for donors to come in that way too at the same point. On your website right now, I know it was on there earlier today, it still says, will you update your Flash player? I mean, if you're on an iPhone, they don't have that anymore. There's no connection there. So there's something on your website you can't even see from these devices sometimes. I'm not sure what it is because I don't sit there and compare the two. I'm sure your tech people can tell you that. But there's something that's running by Flash on your website you can't see on an iPad. And if you're talking about the percentage of people that are on Androids, I don't have one, so I can't tell if that's an issue with them, that the Flash isn't the issue. But what other conflicts there are there, that's something you need to pay attention to. At any rate, I want to thank you for your time. I think, again, you have to remember that your job here is to try to facilitate the taxpayers' monies going to the campaign so that they can all participate in an election and be active candidates, first time or not. But at the same time, you shouldn't be the ones that step up and say we're going to impact the outcome of an election. You want to help the process, you want to help the participation, but when it comes down to a vote, if there's a 100-vote difference on who wins and who loses, you shouldn't be able to point to this board and say, hey, so-and-so won because the board took this action or that action. So, and the last comment I would make about somebody saying that city council has changed and reflects New York City because of this board, at the same time, we can't forget term limits had a lot to do with that. Because, again, there's the power of the incumbency. But beyond that, when you have somebody that is term limited out and there's going to be a fresh election with an open seat, that's where this board can step in and help people quite a bit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any
I mean,
questions?
just, you know, we're not going to get obviously into the debate about the various judgments on Lou or anything else.
I'm happy to.
I understand. I mean, the record is a far more complete than has been suggested. But putting all that aside, I just want to make clear on things like the advance or whatever, the fact that you haven't heard does not mean that things are not happening.
Has there been a connection between you and the federal government with my other
I've said
complaints?
all I am allowed to say. The fact that
Okay.
you have not heard doesn't mean that things are not happening.
Okay.
There's also, I think, I just want to actually add something, which is that there's not just an implication. I mean, you've come out outright and said that we are making decisions to affect the outcomes of these races. When you are explicitly suggesting that we actually are making decisions biased in favor of a political outcome. And I just have to say that I just find that a really an objectionable statement, because after my experience on this board and seeing all of the endless thoughtful deliberations that happen, including among staff and at the board level, that we may look at the implications of the decisions on the outcomes, which concern us a lot. But we have never made a decision to favor a political outcome ever.
I did not use the word "to." I used the word that the actions had that impact. So I'm not accusing any individual or the board of intentionally doing so. But I think when you look back at the actions and what they are, for instance,
Of course they will. I mean, of course, we're dealing in issues which are about campaign finance, and by their very nature, we're going to have decisions which are going to have outcomes, and they may or may not adversely affect a candidate, but we're going to make those decisions, and that's our job.
Our last touchmark, sorry, is Lucy Coutine. Sorry, got distracted. Welcome.
Hi. I'm Lucy Coutine. I live in Brooklyn. And I thank you for this opportunity to voice my thoughts. And I'm just going to pretty much straight read what I wrote here. My expectations for matching funds, that my preferred candidate would receive what he was due, was denied. And for that, I believe there was a terrible failure in the matching funds program. Financing campaigns is meant to help level the playing field for all candidates who can meet a certain criteria. In order for it to be successful, the Campaign Finance Board must be an objective body that distributes funds to all who meet this criteria. The CFB cannot be a tool for discrimination. Unfortunately, in this past election cycle for mayor, we saw an inappropriate and possibly illegal response to one candidate who had received widespread support for his candidacy through New York City and beyond those borders. This denial of funds was made more distasteful due to the fact that two of the CFB voting members had contributed and helped raise funds for one of the competing candidates. Those two members should have recused themselves in the decision-making that denied matching funds for mayoral candidate John Liu. Because John Liu was denied his due matching funds, he was unable to compete in the use of advertising and mailings that other mayoral candidates had access to. John Liu's campaign was suspiciously targeted and unequally investigated. Other candidates had questionable practices that included illegal bundling and PAC contributions, but they were not targeted for investigation. The CFB amplified the unfair treatment of one candidate by denying him the matching funds that are paid for by the taxpayers. It was not up to the CFB to find a decision that was independent of the courts. The taxpayers were denied the proper use of their tax dollars, and the results of the election were unfairly manipulated because of this denial. Some very minor infractions were found in Lou's campaign. Many people in the city have asked what the motivation was to conduct a secret investigation into only one candidate. Without an equal investigation and sting operation conducted to every candidate, how would the public know what practices were conducted in those other candidacies? How would the CFB know? John Liu himself was never accused of anything, yet the CFB took it upon themselves to be the arbitrator to punish his campaign. The CFB's action has contributed to the jaundiced and cynical view held by the public, contributing to the feeling of being disempowered from the political process. This is the opposite of the intention of matching funds, which is meant to empower the choices made by the people. We were all disenfranchised by the decision made by the CFB, and their actions look to be governed by political considerations. That's the end of my testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Curtin.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, we have one very last person. It's very late. We were supposed to end at 1 o'clock, but is it Reginald Sweeney?
Sweeney.
Neither. Okay, thank you.
Happy New Year, everyone. Okay, my name is Reginald Sweeney. The campaign was Sweeney 2013. I was a first-time candidate, and it was very, very interesting. I thought construction was a little dirty and corrupt, but this game is a little different, has its own problems. Today, I want to just make about 3 or 4 quick points about my experience. And my experience was as this. When I first came to campaign finance, the information, the training, the buyer beware type of letting people know what could happen if you misappropriate funds and how to get on C-Smart, how to log on to State Board of Election is one of the best things that I've encountered as far as just taking on something new and having it help me be informative. There was a couple little kinks with me. I had a great guy in the beginning, then, I got switched over, but I'll leave that for another conversation. But one of the things that I'm really, truly concerned about, is funds. I mean, I felt once I got going, at one point, I got a little frustrated with something that took place, and I didn't even want the funds. I wanted to bow out of the program because you have a cap on how much funds you can raise before matching funds kicks in. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's crazy because I feel that if a woman that is 70 years old and she goes into a nest egg and give you a $20 contribution, if you get whatever contribution somebody contributes to your campaign should be matched. Once I didn't realize that was going to happen, I decided to use my own money. And I was trying to run a grassroots campaign, and I learned really, real fast that you need to do fundraising and do it and raise money to get the matching fund. I felt that if you raise $5,000, you should match $5,000. So that's my opinion on that. How funds are matched, it just should be, if you raise a certain amount of money, it should be matched. I really don't even like using taxpayers' money for this because I believe that if you really run a strong campaign and you're connecting with your constituents, and I think you can actually run a campaign. As far as the city council race is concerned, in my opinion, less than $50,000, but some people may have other thoughts. I brought today the mailing that was bombarded my district and my race. We've had 5 candidates run in my race, and the mailing, when I counted on the train, I just did an average of each mailing to every constituent may cost you no more than $6,000, but the most $10,000, a little less than $6,000, because I found that out when I went to go mailing at the last minute. it was a lot of money. So you got $600,000 worth of mailing right here for a city council race. And most of this mailing came from, as you're going to touch on at 2 p.m., independent spending, bringing them out of the dark. There should be a cap on any, whether it be union, philanthropist, anyone, when it comes to a city council race, and maybe you can look at certain races, how you can cap this type of influence. This will distort your program going forward. No one, you should put a cap on any independent spending that is aiding a campaign, or even if the campaign didn't even ask the person to even mail these mailings, because it really made my race totally unfair. You should look at when there's money left over or whatever. I see a lot of guys having either victory parties or losing parties. They use the money, whatever. That should be taken out of the program right off, because it should be just for reaching the constituents, plain and simple. So the mailing really was a problem for me. But I'm really concerned about when you get your matching funds. You know, I didn't get a chance to receive matching funds, and once I was learning and I was getting along and I was learning as I go, my frustration came where, you know what, if I wanted to opt out of matching funds program, is there any way that somebody could say, you know what, you didn't give me a dime, I did the disclosure forms, I did everything, I don't want to be in this program? Is it some kind of cutoff where you can say, oh, you know what, I'm thinking twice about this, and I don't want to participate, right? Even after the disclosures and everything like that. Your website never stays up, because when I went on the website and I was getting information really at the ready, because I really didn't have a chief of staff and all, I wanted to find out if there was an American way of ethics and honesty, and just a candidate going out, getting the petitions, a candidate going. I couldn't do everything, and I learned I can't do everything, but I didn't want to be told, because when I looked at some of the candidates that was running against me, I saw where they were putting their money. Before the even primary hit, one guy gave $5,000 to an attorney. I mean, nothing happened yet. But at the same time, at the end, we had a runoff, there were some issues, and the votes were counted. Then the money, I saw a little light on how if you needed an attorney or if you was challenging the vote, the numbers, that's when that would help them out. But that was done way before that, so maybe he gave a retainage. I don't know how they make out the money or how these guys do what they do, and a lot of people a lot more experienced than me. So that was one thing that really worried me. So, you know, I just would worry about this. You should put a cap on any outside unions, whatever, on that. And then my other thing, because I'm a little nervous, but I'm not, you know, I was rushing the snow. I thought you guys were going to cancel, but I made it. But when you start talking about technology and you want to use technology can't be like the Affordable Health Care Act websites. Your website is down now, because I was trying to call. That's a problem, because I didn't get into the voters guide. I didn't get a chance to participate in some other things because whatever reason, but we didn't make it. Loading up the information. I was typing it, and then I would lose all the data. So you really, if you want to plan on using technology, you got to make sure that you do your maintenance at a certain time, preferably weekends, maybe once a month. I don't know. I know you guys give out a lot of money, so you really want to watch everyone. But to close, to sum up everything is I had a great time running. I am who I am. I look who I am, but I felt some things were a little. I wasn't happy with a couple of things at the end with the assistance I got. I got so frustrated I was asking for the supervisor. I wasn't happy. I'm actually waiting for you guys to audit me so I can just say that I did everything right based on what you taught us. And anybody that violates your rules and regulations should go to jail immediately, because you are actually telling us what could happen. Try to do the right thing. You give us great assistance. The taxpayers should know that you mean well, But I really, really think going forward, the way the city has changed, what's the mayor's slogan now? The tale of two cities or something like that? Well, your politics has a tale of the rich. God bless you guys, and trees, trust me, I had a wonderful time running, and we shook them up in Brooklyn, and I ran against a machine. And one last thing, I just saw something on New York where the city council has a new speaker. You should look at how you have loopholes that you should close out so people cannot use money and move money around and do all of this, and basically tighten up your belt. But if you raise $1 should be matched, because I raised enough, hell to, if I got out 2 mailings, my 5% numbers would have been a lot higher. And, thanks a lot. I made it. Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. First, we have Ms. Zeta Udine, who has provided us with written testimony, and on the board has been provided with us. So welcome, Ms. Udine.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so proud about to be here and working with Campaign Finance Board and with the Board of Election. I think this is the first time Bengali translated in the ballot, 61 polling booth in Queens. We are so proud to working with Board of Election, and we got what we want. Thank you. My name is Mazeda Udin. I am community leader and activist working at the challenge facing South Asian American community in a variety of areas, including education, employment, poverty, worker rights, voting rights, gender, and healthcare and immigration issue. We speak New York City voter education in the context of engaging people for all diversity, faiths, cultural and nationally, rights, election representation. The New York Election Board in constantly changing. Asian American are now the fastest growing racial group in the city, and newly naturalized citizens greatly benefit from Section 203, the Language Assistance Provision of Voting Rights Act. Throughout the 5 borough interpreters as full size are greatly needed, as so voters limited English proficiency will be able to cast their vote. Minimum cultural intent and listed various Asian American growing segment electoral with the large population first time voters and foreign born natural US citizens. Nearly 4 out of 5, 79% of Asian American polled over foreign born natural US citizens. 10% because of citizens within the past 2 years. Language assistance and bilingual ballots are needed to preserve access to vote of New York City in 5 boroughs. More than 1/3, 37% of Asian American voters polled or limited action proficiency LAP, defined and speak English less than very well. Out of 5, 18% respondents identify English as their native language. Among them different Asian ethnicity groups polled, Korean American had the highest concentration of LAP voters, with more than half of 67% identify themselves as LAP, followed by the Vietnamese American 59%, Chinese American 55%, Bangladeshi American voters are 45%. As that the Asian LAP voters need help, they do not know the basic information of election. For this, more efforts are needed regarding education them of self-issue of the language, especially in language assistance required under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. They need to be educated how, when, how register, who is eligible, when elections are when, primaries are how to vote, who is running, if interpreters of translated materials are available, and whether they are bring someone with them to help them vote. The Campaign Finance Board published the New York City Voter Guide. It was translated into Bengali but had many errors in it. I bring that this voter guide, which has to be corrected. And inside that, yesterday I took that staples, and they said election board has to be authorized to copy it. Interpreter and translated materials must be provided to LAP voters to Section 203 covered poll site. Even if a poll site is not legally covered under Section 203, the board should recommend request by community-based organization to stop certain falsehood with interpreters. All voters should be made aware of the fact that they can be assisted by person of their choice inside the voting booths if they cannot read English or otherwise need assistance. Many voters and poll workers do not know this. Voters and poll workers need to be educated on this provision of law, Section 288 of the Voting Right Act. I'm just finishing that. I'm not going to more finish, but has to be corrected. The voting right observation has to be last page. The language of the observation about the existing voter guide. The language of the voter guide is lengthy and complex. It needs to be simple and easy for the voters to understand it better. Also, there are mistakes in translating in the guide. The main focus of the guide should be educated to engage the immigrant voters in the voting process in an easy and simple manner. Number 3, they need to be educated on how, when to register, who is eligible, when election, when primaries are, how to vote, who is running, if interpreters of translated materials are available, and whether they can bring someone with them to help them vote. These are the things who should be given top priority in the guide, not the candidate's profile. A total new guide is needed to fulfill the purpose where voter information should be given main focus and photos and sample ballots can be used to make it easy. Candidate profiles should not be included in the guide. Profiles can be given as a separate booklet in fold times. This will be make the guide handy and useful to the voters. This guide should be general guide to be used in all the elections that are held in USA or New York City for all the voters. Thank you. And recently, we established in ASAL organization new immigration manual book in Bengali translated in 8 languages. Bengali was one of these, and I think we can help translated election voter guide. If you're giving us the chance, we can do that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Our final testifier, I'm sorry, did anyone have questions? I'm sorry. No, we're done. I don't think anyone had a question for you. Thank you, Mr. Dean. Our final testifier is Steve Kramer. Welcome, Mr. Kramer.
Thank you. Did everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be brief here today, and I plan to submit some testimony. I just got back from Albany, so it's been a rough day. This past cycle, I worked with 36 of the winning 51 council members. I indirectly or directly helped that number of people. We do 59 members of Congress with my firm get out the vote. So I stand before you today as someone who has a lot of experience within the campaign world, having dealt with the Board of Elections and the the Campaign Finance Board here in New York City on almost a daily occasion in many cases. I can tell you that the CFB does an excellent job. You really, from a candidate services and from being able to work with the treasurers, I think you really go the extra mile, and I personally appreciate it. I did not find and do not find that being the case at the Board of Elections, which I have separate specific issues with. The integrity of this board, I think, is unquestioned. I think the backgrounds of each of you stand not only on paper but in practice, both on an investigative side as well as on an ethical side, in being able to root out different things that are happening, be able to give advice to people to go ahead and follow the rule of the law as well as the spirit of the law. However, I think that there is a lack of campaign experience. And when I say campaign experience, I don't mean from an oversight perspective. I mean from being in the industry, knowing exactly what to expect, what loopholes they're looking at or trying to use in order to be able to circumvent the law or circumvent, let's say, upcoming law, which might be practiced more in Albany. It's frustrating to me sometimes because I think that there is just a minor gap in having someone among your board that you can all refer to and say, geez, how are they going to get by us on this one? Well, what can we do to prevent it? To that end, I'm sure other consultants would do the same. A quick call from any of you to my office, and I can assure you you'll get a call right back on anything you're looking to know regarding anything that's going on within your purview. Third, and this will be my last point of the day, is I think that because not just of the outside money that has come in to New York politics, but because the continued flow of what will be in the next cycles to come, I encourage you strongly to raise the amount of money that is available to candidates, both in its level, maybe to get them up to $250,000, which I think would be a modest raise, but also to award that money a little earlier. There's a real rush to spend in that week before the primary because, quite frankly, sometimes you're administering that money on the Thursday or the Friday beforehand. Because of that amount of cash flow, I think that treasurers get overwhelmed. I think that a lot of times the different consultants who are out there or different other people who are working on there don't even know if they have a job on the Monday beforehand because they don't know if they've got the money to pay people. So I think that and I know you have a schedule of how those payments go out, but maybe to back it up a little bit if you could, so that way as soon as someone does make the ballot and is certified to be the candidate, they get their first payment or whatever they may qualify for. I'm open to any questions.
Does anyone have questions? I actually have a question about that timing because it's something that we've talked about here. And I mean, we generally give the payments pretty much within a day or so of the Board of Election certifying the ballot. And I guess, so, I mean, not everybody qualifies on the first payment, of course, but, the majority of candidates get their money that first payment. And I was wondering, are you talking about earlier? Because it's hard to decide who to give money to at that point.
I mean, sometimes it's just they don't even know if they're going to get approved by you sometimes because of whatever's going on with their specific issues on their particular reports. Having a faster, okay, you're going to be able to be approved by this time, we know this is going to happen. It gives them an opportunity to be more genuine with the people that they're working with on the other side. But by the same token, having more money available to them, let's say even earlier, and having the smallest of the payments come at the last portion, if that's possible. I know that works out that way sometimes, but I can tell you from a campaign flow, having all of that money come in from that last week of July or maybe sometimes the first week of August when everything is certified and maybe they passed the judge or whatever they had to do to stay on the ballot. I think it's incumbent because now you have everything being spent at the end of the summer in a short window where not everybody's here, so what everybody does is back it up to the last 2 weeks, and then it becomes a real mess. And then the after portion, and I'm sure Susan and some of the other people today have spoken about this, it gets messy, and that's why you need that form afterwards to see where that money got spent, even if the public doesn't get to see it until afterwards, which is unfortunate. So I hope that answered your
No, that
question.
did, yes.
Anybody else? I actually kind of was hoping, Richard, you were going to ask me a question. I've never been asked a question by a Watergate investigator before. So I thought, okay. That would be great. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So that concludes our hearing. Thank you for everyone who testified, all the panelists and the board for their attention, all the people who sat in the audience all day. And I think we've learned a lot, and we're able to proceed to prepare our post-election hearing.